So, Lone Rider here, and I just wanted to say I think a lot of cycling organizations are missing the point. There's a lot of groups out there that advocate for cycling, and um, as a cyclist, I kind of look at what they're doing and say, maybe they don't quite understand. A lot of them probably mean well, but again, the question is, what's the effect of what they're doing? And I periodically get various emails from various cycling groups, and a lot of them, like I just got one from this Bike San Francisco or something group that I must have clicked on a long time ago because I don't really remember it, but every once in a while I get like an email from them. And the emails always talk about, our new efforts to provide a car-free space on such and such a street, or our new efforts to provide a divided bike lane, which essentially means a bike path because it's separated. So, it's not a lane marking on the street anymore. It's a separate path. It's like a side path basically, with all the dangers that side paths entail. If you know anything about side paths and cycling, you know how incredibly dangerous they are. But it amazes me. All of these cycling groups seem to be focusing on like stuff that's not to do with the roadways. This specific bike-related infrastructure, or that specific bicycle-related infrastructure. And what they seem to be forgetting is that where most of us ride, with the exception of mountain biking, obviously, because that takes place off-road in the woods, but where most of us ride, whether we're riding to the store, whether we're going out for a long road ride, whether we're training, whatever, whether we're riding to work or commuting or doing errands, generally speaking, where most of us ride is on the roadway network. And so it seems to me that any cycling advocacy efforts that neglect issues related to the roadway network and efforts to improve that, to focus solely on bike-specific separate infrastructure, it's like, okay, you're detouring down a dead end. You're focusing on something that ignores the main issue. And I honestly, like I said, I honestly think that these people mean well, but I have to ask, where do they expect this to go? Do they really expect any network of bike lanes or separate paths, i.e. divided bike lanes or anything else, to be an adequate substitute at any point in the future for America's road network? Do they expect that, anybody could ever use any of these things to do what they can do on the roads? And I think if you used a little common sense and you just kind of, put two and two together using your noggin, you'd realize that that's not the case. There's no substitute for the roads. And so it seems to me that a lot of bike advocacy efforts are focusing on things that don't actually benefit actual cyclists. I don't know about you. Where I live, there aren't any bike lanes. Now, occasionally, if I'm riding out somewhere, on a long ride, I'll occasionally come across one in another town. And you know what? If it's where I happen to be at that point in terms of lane position and where I have to be riding and yada yada, I'll use it. But I sure as hell don't plan my riding around the existence of bike infrastructure because there isn't any where I live. And guess what? Outside of big cities, and I know, a lot of people just focus on big cities because it's like, well, they're big cities and they have a lot of people. And yeah, you know what? Most people in the country don't live in big cities. Most people in the country live in regular towns and stuff. We've got, a handful of urban centers with a large number of people, a disproportionately large number of people clustered within them and subject to a variety of weird and cockamamie laws, from high taxes and business regulations to gun control to God knows what. But at the end of the day, that's not the vast majority of people in America. The vast majority of people in America don't live in New York or LA or places like that. They live in, or San Francisco. They live in regular small towns or small cities or suburbs or rural areas. And if they want to get out there and ride their bicycles, a lot of this bike-specific infrastructure that's being talked about being built in big cities is going to be completely irrelevant to them. And for even those cyclists who do happen to live in particularly intensely crowded urban environs, okay, so you're putting all your focus on bike-specific infrastructure that exists on this road or that road or whatever. That's great. What about all the other roads in that town? You don't think people are going to bicycle on those, perhaps? Maybe if they have to get somewhere, you know? So it seems to me that a lot of cycling advocates are actually doing cyclists a disservice. They seem to focus on bike-specific infrastructure separate from the roadways to the exclusion of the roadways. And you know, I have to wonder if these people really understand what they're doing. Like I said, I think they mean well. But at the end of the day, if you mean well and you're actually doing more harm than good by putting the focus on something that ignores the main issue, aren't you still doing more harm than good, right? So I would challenge a lot of these cycling-specific advocacy groups and organizations to not forget about the rest of us, right? Not everybody lives in some big city, you know, like New York or LA or San Francisco. Not everybody wants to live in such a place. Not everybody does live in such a place. Not everybody is living in an area where bike-specific infrastructure is practical or possible or, you know, feasible. And even if you do live in an area where it's feasible to introduce some bike-specific infrastructure, that's never going to be a substitute for the broad road network that we all share: drivers, bicyclists, pedestrians, etc. And that's where the focus should ultimately always remain. Because, you know, if you want to talk about bike lanes or bike paths or any other darn thing, as an adjunct to that, as a you know, in addition to that, that's great. And you know what? More power to you for that. But by itself, talking about such things just ignores the big picture. And that big picture is that most of us ride on the road. And you know what? We're going to continue riding on the road for the foreseeable future. And no network of bike-specific infrastructure, however constructed, is ever going to be a substitute for adequate access to the roadway networks. And so we shouldn't be ignoring, you know, it's one thing to be like, well, so-and-so wants to build a bike lane somewhere or a divided path or whatever. You know what? That's great. What I want to know is, what are they doing to help me? Because I'm riding on the road, along with the cars and the 18-wheelers and the jaywalkers and everybody else. And I have safety concerns that are related to the roadway that aren't going to be addressed by you building a path somewhere or a bike lane or whatever. And that's where most of us are coming from, right? Most American cyclists, just like most Americans, don't live in some big city somewhere. So please remember that, okay? Please don't forget about us, okay? Don't forget about us. We're out there, we exist. And, you know, I honestly don't know how we got to this point where the focal point for cycling advocacy seemed to be something that's completely irrelevant to the vast majority of the nation's cyclists. So they built a bike lane somewhere. Okay, what does that have to do with the rest of us who are riding on the roadways? Seriously. Lone Rider out.